My meeting today, 7 degrees from you. My sister has two.
So he doesn't. Yeah, that's why I had an A and it was Friday. That's why you're improving.
How are you?
All right, we'll get started. Council come to order. Megan, please
Chief Justice Hecht,
here.
Judge Keller here, Ms. Steve Bash, Mr. Bryant, Justice Coy, Ms. Clayton, right here, Senator Creighton,
Yes.
Mr. Gimbel, Judge Gravel, Judge Laird, Representative Leach, Judge Maderi,
I'm here.
Justice Miskell here, Justice Nash,
Present.
Judge Person, Ms. Rax, Judge Sawyer, Representative Smith, Judge Spillane,
Here.
Justice Wise,
Here.
and Senator Zaffarini. I know we have a couple of people that were joining on the phone today, and I know Senator Zaffarini is going to be a little bit late.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. As a reminder, the meeting is webcast live and will be recorded, is being recorded and will be archived and available later on the website. As you all know, the 88th legislative session ended May 29, regular session. The governor called a special session later that day, and it has ended, and about an hour after it ended, he called a second special session. So they seem to be having difficulty resolving the property tax cut issues. And that's the focus that the governor has put on the special sessions, but there's some anticipation that when that is resolved, there will still be some time for consideration of some of our priorities left over from the session, and as a result of the legislation that did not make it after the session ended, including bail and judicial pay. So we'll see. We're all watching all of that, continuing to monitor everything. So we'll talk about that more during the meeting. Many of the council recommendations passed, including youth Class C diversion. Finally, and case level data we'll hear more about here in a little while to improve the reporting on cases throughout the state. And we're going to begin discussion this morning of artificial intelligence. When the Federal Fifth Circuit Conference put it on their program back the first part of May, it seemed, my read of the attendees was, do we really need to worry about this yet? And now we're pretty much in full panic mode. So we gotta figure out what's going on with that, and we'll have a good presentation on that. And then as we're going through things today, please think about committees that you want to serve on. So as the veterans here know, the work is done in committees, so we take volunteers and then we conscript you. But anything you want to work on, please let Megan know. We'll settle that up in the fall and get those assignments out and get everybody working. So that's kind of what we have for today. You've had a chance to look at the minutes of the February meeting. Any comments or objections? They'll stand approved. We'll go to reports. The Texas Indigent Defense Commission. Scott Ellis is doing a great job as interim director, and we're anxious to hear from you, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Justice Heck, Presiding Judge Keller, members. Once again, I'm Scott Ehlers. I'm the interim executive director at the Texas Indigent Defense Commission. Jeff Burkhart left us in May. He's now the executive director at the Texas Fair Defense Project. So I want to give you all a few updates, starting with what our board meeting. So we met in March as well as just yesterday. Yesterday's board meeting was really dedicated to grants, and we gave away $63 million in grants yesterday for the biennium. Much of that was for, there was a large chunk of that for Operation Lone Star Defense. $3.5 million in new improvement grants were awarded yesterday, including a 13-county High Plains Regional Public Defender Office that will be run out of Hale County, that's up in the Panhandle. Victoria County will be overseeing the Coastal Plains Regional Public Defender Office. That's going to cover 4 counties. Grayson County, we awarded a grant to them to establish a managed assigned counsel program. And the Lubbock Private Defender Service, they received the funds for Operation Lone Star. They oversee the provision of defense counsel, private defense counsel. Counsel is also provided through the Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid and Neighborhood Defender Service of Texas. We're also looking to establish a public defender office in Eagle Pass that will cover Zavala, Maverick, and Gwinnett counties. Regarding our legislative updates, we were appropriated almost $155 million for the biennium, which is an increase of over $30 million from the last biennium. More than half of that was general revenue, which is a big change for us. Usually our appropriation is all general revenue dedicated funds. And so more than half of that is now general revenue. That was to make up for some shortfalls we had in terms of court cost collections that we use to provide indigent defense, as well as for Operation Lone Star Defense. About $41 million was for Operation Lone Star Defense, and that was all from general revenue. We received, there's a rider in there for about $5 million to establish rural public defender offices, and another rider for $5 million to fund mental health defender programs. And we also received 6 FTEs that we requested. 2 bills I wanted to note for y'all. HB 409 is going to add 2 members to TIDC's board. So one of those members is going to be either a managed assigned counsel director or a person with demonstrated expertise in indigent defense matters. And then the second position is going to be a justice of the peace or other magistrate who oversees 1517 proceedings. The other bill I wanted to mention for you is SB 2120. which is going to establish a family protection representation program at TIDC. And I'm going to turn things over to Crystal Lefpignon, who handles those matters for TIDC, and she's going to discuss that bill as well as present the CPS expenditure report to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning. Thank you, Chief Justice Hack and members of the council. I'm going to briefly go over SB 2120 with y'all and then the data report that we have for your consideration today. So SB 2120 didn't pass, and that came from a council recommendation, and it originally started with Judge Judicial and the Civil Justice Committee. So thank you for that support to everyone who supported that, and thank you to Senator Zaffarini, because the senator filed the bill and shepherded it through the legislature, and we appreciate all of that work. So basically what the bill does is it amends Chapter 79 of the Government Code, which are TIDC's enabling statutes. And in simple terms, it essentially allows TIDC to do all of the good work that it has been doing in criminal and juvenile indigent defense cases and start doing that in child protection cases for indigent parents, children who are receiving court-appointed counsel in those cases. So very exciting. The bill also amended a section in the Family Code, increasing the required experience of chief counsels of offices of child and parent representation from 3 years to 5 years. We currently only have one office of child representation and one office of parent representation, so it's not going to affect too many existing offices, but TIDC hopes to change that someday, and we increase those numbers of offices in the future. And it also, there is a new section of the Family Code that will require attorney practice time reporting for attorneys who do child protection cases. Attorneys who have taken appointments in criminal cases and juvenile cases have had to do attorney practice time reporting, and we're going to have that for CPS attorneys. So moving on to the data report. So FY22 was the second year that counties had to start reporting their data to the council. And currently the statute that we're under right now is in the Government Code, and it's section 71.0355. That was from SB 560 from the 86 legislature, which required this reporting. Next reporting cycle, because of the new bill, the reporting will go directly through TIDC, but for this year, it goes through the council. FY22 is only expenditure reporting, so we did not get plans from the judges. That will happen next year. And just to give you some highlights, the total spending that was reported was just over $61 million. This is a decrease in reported spending of just over $4.6 million from FY 2021. In FY 2021, there was about 66 million reported. Some reasons for that are there were less children who were in the custody of DFPS, less children who were in family preservation cases, so it makes sense that maybe the spending went down. We don't know for sure, though, exactly why. We did have more reporting from counties, so that's good. We had 239 counties reporting expenditures this year. That was up from 233 from the previous year. And we had 231 counties reporting appointments, which was up from 224 in FY21. So things are looking good, I think. Appointments are a bit of a challenge for counties to report. We've been getting feedback from them. We're going to change how counties report appointments for this next fiscal year, and I think we'll get better data based on the feedback we've been getting. On page 6 of the data report, just to highlight some of the data, you'll see that the per capita spending throughout the state is inconsistent. There's probably many reasons for that, but that is certainly something that we want to think about. And then new reporting for this year for expenditures. FY21 was the very first year that we got counties reporting this data, so we simply asked for total amount spent and total appointments. Pretty simple. This year, we asked for counties to break up the spending into different categories. We asked them to break it into custodial parents, non-custodial parents, non-parent conservators, children, children appeal, and adult appeal. Since this was the very first year, it was imperfect. The counties are working on implementing systems to get this data. But for it being the first year, I thought we had some pretty good engagement. I will say these numbers, I would consider these to be estimates for now until the counties can get better systems in place. But what we've seen is that counties are roughly spending about the same amounts in representing children and parents. So interesting to see that. And with that, I'll take any questions if anybody has any.
Yes, Judge.
Judge Keller.
I may have missed this, but did you mention that we didn't get any money from the legislature?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to stay positive. Yes, thank you, Judge. Unfortunately, we did not get any new appropriations for the bill, so we didn't get everything we wanted. But the good news is that this now allows TIDC to have the authority and the ability to ask for money next session, which we weren't able to do before. So what our hope is that with this next round of reporting from FY23, we'll have some good solid information to make an ask to get some funds to start getting grants out to the counties and helping improve. So thank you for the reminder, Judge.
Other questions of Crystal? Questions of Scott? Oh, yes. So we need to adopt fiscal year 22 CPS expenditure report, which you have in your materials. So is there a motion to adopt the report? Second? Any discussion? In favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The report is adopted. Thank you, Crystal, Scott, very much for your work and your report. Let's skip down the agenda to recognize our guests this morning under the Centers of Excellence. And Michael Smith is going to present them to the council.
This is both my favorite and most nerve-wracking thing that I do. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Smith. I'm a management analyst with the Research and Core Services Division and the program administrator for the Centers of Excellence program today. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of where the program is right now as a whole, and then introduce our two courts that are being put up for recognition. So right now we are up and running. As you can see that we have two new justices of the peace here today with us for our first justices of the peace to be involved in the program and complete it. And we now currently have 6 active courts going through the program. Judge Ryan Luna in McLennan County, he's County Court of Law number 3. Judge Evelyn McLean up north, JP3. Judge Michael York, Lee County JP2. Judge Nash has joined the program in Dallas. Judge Person is the Temple Municipal Court. And then Judge Sylvia Holmes right here in Travis County, JP2. So we are up and running and getting the program back live, just moving these courts through hopefully this year. They have all completed the initial stages of the program. We've had initial onboarding. We're working with the judges to review the documents and set up the next stages of the program, which include an on-site and further ongoing conversations about how they do the work they do and what makes them stand out. Overall, we're back to sort of making sure that the program is where it should be and iterating and improving the program so that it better reflects the work that our courts do at every level. In working with the justices of the peace, there are some distinctions that stand them out as separate from a county court of law and a district court. So we need to make sure that we're better reflecting the work that they do at that level and capturing what makes them excellent in comparison and on their own. And then one of the next stages that's going to be critical about this is making sure that those recognized courts and centers are talking to each other, sharing resources, and that we're leveraging all of the great things that our courts do and share with us here at OCA, and making sure that's available to not only the members of the Centers of Excellence, but other courts seeking resources and asking questions when they come looking for us. So without further ado, we have we have 2 judges up today, Justice of the Peace 2, Judge J.R. Woolley in Waller, and Justice of the Peace 3 in Rockwall County, Judge Mark Russo. I have compared them to yin and yang and sort of balance, and if you get to know them together, you know that they talk to each other all the time and apparently compete all of the time. So this was a race for both of them.
I had 2 cars, he had 1.
There you go. But what I think what stands out about both of them, and I think what stands out about all of our centers of excellence, is a deep and meaningful commitment to individualized justice, to making sure that every case, every issue, every party heard before the court is heard equally in neutrality, and that their issues are resolved fairly and equitably under the rule of law. And that goes for every single thing that they do. I've watched them conduct registrations, I heard them do simple civil clerk matters, and they are both very dedicated to that approach. And they take those approaches in very similar but very distinct sort of ways, because Waller County and Rockwall County are two very different places. In Judge Woolley's case, he is perhaps one of the most technologically savvy courts that I've initially walked into. Everything is paperless, everything is done through the case management system. He has a filing system set up with all of his clerks so that the process and the procedures of administration run smoothly and quickly. And that allows him a great amount of flexibility to schedule and order his day should he get an inquest or need to conduct a magistration at the jail. He leverages video magistrate to do all of his magistrations remotely and has a good working relationship with the local county sheriff's office to make sure magistrations get done in a timely fashion, and that no one is being held any longer than they need to be without having a bond set and a decision made. On the opposite side of that, he is deeply committed to his community. Before being a justice of the peace, he was an EMS member at the Waller County EMS, a volunteer fire chief. He has worked with the sheriff's office, and before that, he spent several years in the Air Force working in telecoms and doing all of those things. So that might give you a hint as to why he's a little bit more technologically up than you would expect him to be. But what stands him out is what stands all of our courts out. He takes the work seriously. He fills in gaps when he needs to. He makes sure that everyone in his court is heard fairly and has an opportunity to hear their cases presented properly. While I was there, he had a man come in who was in need of an occupational driver's license, but had several tickets across several counties, and he took the time to sit in the courtroom and determine where those tickets were out of, what he needed to do to get them resolved, and reassure him that it was best that he get them resolved soon so that he could continue about his day before we could even begin to countenance the idea of an occupational driver's license. It's individualized justice, and it's an availability that's worth done. And one of the things that I think that stood out was he does alternative dispute resolution for all of his civil cases. He offers the opportunity for people to go in and have the cases resolved outside of the courtroom through a Zoom alternative dispute resolution out of Harris or Montgomery? Montgomery County. And he took on that initiative all on his own to just provide extra service to his constituents and everyone that comes in his courtroom. Now, in turning to Judge Russo. Judge Russo, again, very similar situation, very, very technologically savvy. But Judge Russo's name is accessibility. He wants to be available and open to everyone in his court. Before he ever started this program, he took on a number of initiatives to make sure that his courthouse was accessible to everyone, whether they were coming in person, whether they were needing to resolve issues online, whether they needed just to get simple information. Going back all the way back to 2013, his is the only JP that has the Google Translate function embedded into his webpage so that it can be translated into any language should they have any need to come in and get the issues taken care of. Beyond that, while we were there, his primary concern was signage. And I know signage seems like a very sort of blasé topic, but navigating a courthouse, trying to find your way around, trying to do the things that you need to get done could be a challenge if you're hard of hearing, particularly if you're done, or even if you're just, intimidated by the fact that you're court today. So while we were there, we went on an extensive tour to review places where he thought the signage could be better, what he thought he could see being more useful, particularly making sure that there was clear and obvious signage to the law library that exists in the Rockwall County Courthouse, which is kind of stuffed back into a corner. It's a fantastic resource, but right before you get it on a long hallway, there's a sign on the door that says, stop. And so if you're walking down that hallway and all you see is a big red sign that says stop, you may never make it to the county, to the law library. So we worked with him while we were there to try and get that issue resolved and get a good set of signs up through the courthouse so that they could navigate and find their way. Beyond that, he's deeply committed to his community and the students in his community because he was the justice of the peace that took on the truancy docket and the teenage docket for Rockwall County. in doing that, he had to establish new relationships with the local ISDs, ensure that the process was clean and fair, and he makes sure that when they are heard before him, that they are heard, both the parent involved in the question and the student involved in the question, so that they get their moment in court to be heard before a judge, voice any issues, and have their concerns addressed before he issues a judgment relating to truancy or any other teenage matters. Both of these judges display a deep and meaningful commitment to their communities and are excellent representatives of the justice of the peace courts. And I'm very proud that they are the first ones that made it through. They were also the only ones that wouldn't leave me alone when I presented it at the Justice of the Peace conferences last year. So without further ado, I set them up for recommendation. I recommend them for recommendation.
So is there a motion to adopt the recommendation?
I move that we adopt the recommendation.
Any discussion? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thanks, Judge. The motion carries. Congratulations. Introduce your guests.
This is my wife, Nicole. It's just an honor to be here.
This is my wife, Gretchen, my civil court coordinator, Sharon, one of my bailiffs, Kara, and my conditional services coordinator, Michelle.
I'll take pictures.
Yeah, they are rock wall.
Steve says right here.
Right here.
He hasn't, we haven't just layered it from Montgomery.
Miles.
Okay. And 3, 2, 1. Perfect.
Thank you.
We should take one of each one.
Sorry?
We should take one of each one.
Yeah.
One at a time, so.
Yeah, this was
Sorry, send it out, but I want my own. You all to yourself.
2, 1.
We have asked the judges to stick around after the meeting if there were, for more pictures, if we would like to capture them as well.
Great.
And as it says, we can, you're welcome to stay in the meeting, or certainly when we finish, we can take pictures in the courtroom, families and staff, and as many as you want. So we'll be ready for that.
Before I step down, are there any further questions? Any questions about the status of the Centers of Excellence program? Anything?
Senator?
How do we ensure that we maintain excellence? For example, when a court was designated a center of excellence before COVID, how do we make sure that that court is maintaining the standards of excellence, or when there's a change in judges?
So we are currently working through those processes right now. I've been discussing it with both Jeffrey and our one of our priorly elected or recognized Centers of Excellence, Judge L'Oreal, about what do we need to do to carry the program forward to make sure that judges are maintaining, and then also how do we engage those judges in a more meaningful way in the process, because we do owe them a deep debt for helping us get the process live, help us work the kinks out. And I think they are also good arbiters about what excellence looks like currently and what excellence can look like going forward, because the standard should continue to get higher, not lower. As to the question of a new judge, I think in that instance, if we had a turnover in a role and a judge took on a higher role, I think we would probably need to restart the process with that court. Because so much of what the court does is led by who's leading the court in the moment. So as long as courts are in process, we're fine, and then we will do that out, because we have some iterations, some changes we need to make this stronger and more institutionalized here at OCA and ready for, the opportunity to, if this does become attached to a merit-based program, to be ready for that in a serious way.
Perhaps during the interim, we can address those two issues.
Are the standards being documented, and are you deriving metrics, performance metrics from those?
So we have a court review document that asks a series of high-level, sort of low-touch questions about what the court does. And they're simple yes or no questions, and Judge Materi can vouch to this. When she first saw it, she said, well, Michael, why would anyone say no? And the answer to that question is we want to see what you do and learn what it is the court does. And now that we have a very good picture about the kinds of work that our court do day in, day out, what stands them out, as well as what they do above and beyond day to day as a judge, we can now start to set those standards more firmly. And that's also, again, part of the things that we're going to need to work with the council on and our recognized courts on, is getting that metric and hard standard down so that we can evaluate it in a meaningful way, and that this body is involved in that process more clearly, so that those standards are coming not just from me, Michael Smith, at the OCA. What we'll need to do is review everything that we've done so far, and we've done quite a lot every time I look at the binders of documents that I have and all of the emails I have from the Justice of the Peace, because they have so many papers, so many forms that they do. And so that includes going over the data that we collect here at OCA. That includes some of the data that we just don't see because it's captured at the local level. So average time of inquests, how many inquests a year, what days they do inquests, all of those things are going to have to be accounted for with Justices of the Peace. As we pull in new district and county courts, we're going to have to look at what district and county courts do. We're going to have to look much more closely at the specific jurisdictions of those courts to determine what those need to be, because Judge Laird is a probate court. That is exclusively what she's done. And now I think she's going to be a statutory probate court, which raises the question of, do we need to revisit her status as a center of excellence, because there are new responsibilities under that role. In terms of, county courts, it's what do they share with the district court and the system. And in district courts, it's, are you a civil district court? Are you a criminal district court? Are you a mixed jurisdiction court? Or, when we get our first multi-district court, there's a significant travel component and any number of other things that we'll have to look at to set those standards and make sure that they're firm and higher. And I think currently the way we look at it is we revisit the standards every year. We tweak, we go a little bit farther, we ask a little bit more, we're getting a little bit more detailed. And as we go through that process this year, in anticipation for the next courts in 2024, we'll start engaging the judges that we have on hand to refine those, determine the standards, get better metrics, and start sharing that information more completely.
Thank you.
Yes.
There's one more point, and that is something we discussed before. The problem that some judges have, that they don't want the baseline survey because they don't want those metrics out there. So we talked about perhaps working with those judges so that they can get to a point where they can have a baseline survey that isn't devastating, something that can be used against them. That's what they're afraid of. Like their baseline surveys were excellent. Very good.
Yeah, and so we're working through that problem right now, and what we've tended to do is we keep that right now we're just keeping that a little bit closer to the vest and asking judges if they're comfortable going through the program, knowing that this document may exist. And as we go through with it, we're going to have to firm up what that looks like, because it can look bad. It can look bad if you don't know what you're looking at. It's a very simple graph and it can show very things, but it's an average of an average. So as we get more complex with it, as we start bringing it out more, there will be more fluctuations in the data that we can show. But as it's currently voluntary, most of our judges have been okay with us having that document on hand and keeping it close. And I think we can continue to do it that way.
But we need to reach out to those who are not excellent, who are those far below 80% or 70%.
We're gonna, I mean, there is no standard.
There's going to be, because of House Bill 2384, so it requires OCA to develop standards to help courts that are not performing well. And so that's something that we are going to be working on and what that standard looks like. And I think we'll be able to use that in conjunction with the Centers of Excellence.
I'll give you a short list.
And so I was not aware of that bill because there are so many. So yes, that'll actually be great, like incredibly helpful to help us refine what basic standards are and what excellent standards are so that we can continue to propel those above where they are right now.
Yes.
And I would like to also echo what Senator Zaffarini is saying in connection with what was very unfortunate this last time in the legislature in connection with judicial pay. What y'all are discussing here about the standards and some type of a metric and measurement is going to be, I'm afraid, very crucial to us being able to get a judicial pay raise. There's a large amount of reluctance in the at certain levels about who we're giving these pay raises to. I'm not going to get off into that. But having worked on the bail reform issue in the last session, and again working on it this time, and having the opportunity to have these discussions, it's crucial that we have a metric. Because we have great judges in Texas who need to be rewarded. We need to incentivize other folks to either stay in or to become judges. We need to incentivize good folks to become judges. And right now, Texas ranks way down the list in how we pay our judges, as y'all know, and it's ridiculous. But we've got to get some type of a metric in place so that we can reward the good guys and incentivize the guys who need some help and keep folks in the profession.
And so from our perspective, and I've talked with Jeffrey about this in some of our one-on-ones, is the goal of this program in the next 12 to 24 months is to be ready for that, to be able, because it was proposed this time and we all had a little bit of a heart attack because I went, that's going to be a lot of work on our part and we can do it. But in anticipation of the next legislative session, we are going to be working absolutely hard to make sure that everything is in place so that the program can stand out to identify those judges and reward them for the hard work that they do and making sure that we are touting the good judges that we see come through.
Yes.
Maybe we could work on companion bills. This time I couldn't even get a hearing for the bills. So maybe you and I can work on companion bills and be more successful next time.
Absolutely.
Tying the standard of excellence to extra pay. Or an alternative. Let's work on.
Yeah, I think it just got thrust on us, the idea actually, to tie it to pay got thrust on us in April, which is entirely too late. Frankly, I'd like to see it on the call for the special, but it doesn't sound to me like that. I think I would be putting the cart before the horse maybe a little bit, trying to do it that quickly. Of course, I've seen you guys act fast before.
You told us to make it happen, we would make it happen. When I heard it was coming through, I immediately started brainstorming what we were going to have to do to make it work.
Justice Nissen.
I was just going to add additional information about a program, a separate program that may go hand in hand with this. Senator Zaffarini was asking about confidentiality for folks that want to improve but don't want to kind of admit where they're starting. I'm working with the National Center for State Courts. They're rolling out like an executive coaching program for judges that would be confidential, voluntary. It's not meant for like performance problems, but for those who want to improve in a confidential coaching, like executive coaching program. And so that might be something that might go hand in hand with what OCA is doing.
I'll look into it because a lot of where we drew the initial stuff for the court review was national center standards that we try to adopt and hone down to Texas. Because the National Center does work nationally, so it can feel a little flat when you look at what there are, but we look at core tools and all those things, so that coaching opportunity may be a great thing to plug them into in a model for how we could possibly get that.
We're just getting off the ground. We just got the training. I have my first coaching session next week. So we'll see how it goes.
Is it with National Center, because I've heard about this program, but is it with National Center staff or are they hiring outside?
Both. So as of right now, the people they've paid to put through the training are the National Center staff, but the hope is to have judges coach other judges because of the credibility.
Right.
Well, good work, and we're glad we're doing this. If you saw this morning, U.S. Supreme Court announced their decisions in their last two cases. And our court did the same thing. And people will talk about those cases in the days ahead. But what we need to make sure gets said as well is that our 800 justices of the peace and our 1,200, 1,300 municipal court judges, they're the face of the judiciary for Texas. People have routine problems, that's where they go. And we want every one of those people to come back out of the courthouse and say, thank God for the judges of Texas, and have confidence in the justice system. So you're building that, and Rockwall and Weller counties can be proud of the work that you've done and confident in the justice system because you've done it. So thanks for that, and thanks for the program. And we've got to turn to it with renewed fervor. So.
I have fervor.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Yeah. And so as I say, you're welcome to stay. Anytime you want to leave is fine too, but we'll take pictures in the courtroom next door after we finish. So up to you all. Let's go to the legislative update. Louis Tomasetti.
We'll have some written materials you all should have in your packet. It's going to look just like this.
Legislators may want to cover their ears.
Marrying of agreements.
Good morning. My name is Louis Tomasetti. I'm the Director of Government Relations for OCA. I'm going to try and condense the last 6 months of the legislative session into a presentation. The 88th regular legislative session concluded on May 29th, as the chief mentioned. The last day for the governor to act was on June 18th. You can see that bill filings were up over the 86th and the 87th legislative sessions. They were up by over 16%. Also of interest, there was more vetoes this session than any other session in the history of Texas, except 2001 when Governor Perry had 83 vetoes. As you know, and the chief also mentioned, we are in the 88th second called session now, focusing on property tax relief. The first called session did not have much noteworthy activity out of it legislatively, but it was also focused on property tax relief and border security. The Office of Court Administration completes more fiscal notes than any other agency besides the comptroller. If it mentions the court's criminal liability, new criminal penalties, civil law changes, we get tasked with a fiscal note. We had 1,772 this year, and of those, we submitted more than 1,524 before LBV closed out some requests if the bill wasn't seeing any movement. We're going to work through each of the committee's recommendations, and we'll start with the Criminal Justice Committee. So on slide 3, after the leaking of the Dobbs opinion, the council recommended criminalizing premature release of draft court opinions. They recommended where it was made into a Class A misdemeanor in legislation. Senator Huffman authored Senate Bill 372, and Representative Leach sponsored it in the House. Governor Abbott did sign it, and it is effective September 1, 2023. Switching to youth Class C diversion, I'm pleased to report that the Texas Youth Diversion and Early Intervention Act did pass this session. This was the third attempt at the council recommendation. We were especially pleased that it went through. Judge Person and Judge Woolley are both here, and they both testified at the hearing, or at one of the hearings related to this legislation. What it's going to do is allow, it limits Class C diversions to 1 successful diversion per year, no prior unsuccessful diversions, and it requires municipal courts and JPs to identify a plan and strategies for their community so they know what resources are available. Council also made recommendation to modernize our state's pretrial systems in 2016. Many of those recommendations were incorporated into Senate Bill 6, the Damon Allen Act, that passed the 87th second called session. While there was 4 significant bail bills this session by Senator Huffman and Representative Smith, none got traction, and they ultimately died at the end of the legislative session.
It's a complicated story.
It is. It is. Switching to the Public Trust and Confidence Committee recommendations, clean slate would have automated the process for non-disclosure of first-time nonviolent misdemeanor offenders. OCA worked with a group of stakeholders that was rather large, clerks, probation, advocacy groups, Department of Public Safety throughout the legislative process to navigate the logistics of identifying people who would have qualified for these non-disclosures. Senator Zaffarini and Representative Leach sponsored Senate Bill 499 and House Bill 1737, respectively. House Bill 1737 got a little bit more traction. It passed the House without opposition, but was never voted out of the Senate State Affairs Committee. OCA worked with Senator Zaffarini on the committee's recommendations related to civics education. Senate Bill 1954 would have required additions to the essential knowledge and skills and the curriculums for social studies. The additions emphasize the structure of the court system, the role of the judiciary as the co-equal branch of government, the selection of judicial office holders, the processing of cases, and the federalist system. Bill was heard by the Senate Education Committee. The chief testified in favor of the bill. However, it was left pending in the Education Committee and never voted out.
That was the second attempt.
Yes.
But progress this time because it got a hearing this last time. So next time, we'll get
we were pleased to see Senate Bill 2120 authored by Senator Zaffarini, and I think Crystal did an excellent job outlining the effects of this legislation for TIDC. So we will move on to the next one. The Criminal Justice and Civil Justice Committee recommendations, the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, was passed in June of 2022. One of the changes necessitated clarifications in Texas law to enable clerks to report to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System for juveniles who met the definition of a federal prohibited person for the purchases of firearms. This allowed the reporting of prohibited juveniles with certain mental health or intellectual disability circumstances to be reported to NICS, and Senate Bill 728 was authored by Senator Huffman and is sponsored by Representative Leach and was signed by the governor and is effective September 1, 2023. The council adopted recommendations for the Judicial Commission on Mental Health, which included 16 different topic areas. OCA worked with JCMH and Senator Zaffarini on SB 2479 to navigate the political landscape, and ultimately 5 of the 16 initial provisions remained in the legislation. Those recommendations included harmonizing mental health personal bonds with bail reform, permit the use of 1622 procedures for Class C misdemeanors, allow blood draws for patients receiving court-ordered mental health medication, clarified law enforcement duties when transferring a mental health patient to the hospital facility, and allow for the electronic application for emergency detention warrants by additional medical professionals. Next, we're going to move to judicial compensation. Unfortunately, it did not work out this session, but as you know, the council supported the recommendation of the Judicial Compensation Commission to fund increases to the base salary of a district court judge. They had recommended a 22% increase over the biennium, and House Bill 2779, filed by Representative Leach, had the most traction, and it was voted out of the House, but a committee substitute authored by Senator Huffman changed the compensation scheme, eliminating the base pay and switching it in favor of a third tier. The bill differences were not reconciled when the Senate did not appoint members to a conference committee. As you know, every single council committee has recommended the council collect case level data. House Bill 1 included $4 million for fiscal year 2024 and $2 million for fiscal year 2025 to the Office of Court Administration for a computer system capable of capturing case level data. There was also 9 pieces of legislation that would have required collection of certain case level data. Not all of those were signed into law, but House Bill 841, filed by Representative Cortez, will require the Judicial Council to collect case level data. It was left very broad in its instruction. And the enrolled version of House Bill 1182 by Representative Harless added the language from House Bill 841. In addition, it's going to require 8 specific data elements for counties that are greater than 1 million in population. It's also going to require those counties post that information online. That legislation was signed by the governor on June 12th, and it is effective September 1, 2023. We're obviously going to be working with everyone very closely on this to get it to a place where we can report all those data elements. That concludes all the Judicial Council recommendations. Now we're going to switch over to some bills of interest, which also mention previous Judicial Council recommendations as well. House Bill 19 created the specialized business trial courts to align with the state's administrative judicial regions. The judges are appointed by the governor and serve 2-year terms. The first appointees are to occur as soon as practical, and the remaining appointees will come online by September 2026. The business courts is administratively attached to OCA, and OCA did gain a number of full-time employees as a result of it. House Bill 367, authored by Representative Jeton and sponsored by Senator Zaffarini, will give the State Judicial Conduct Commission the ability to accept complaints, conduct investigations, and take other actions on judicial candidates. House Bill 2384 will require judicial candidates to disclose professional discipline and provide authored appellate briefs or oral arguments if applicable. It requires judges to spend 30 hours on training within their first year and then have continuing education of 16 hours annually every year thereafter. It will require OCA to collect performance metrics and recommend improvements, and it also enables the mentoring that we discussed earlier. House Bill 3474 was the court's omnibus bill this year. It created 12 new district courts, 5 probate courts, and 3 statutory county courts. The bill placed associate judges appointed by the Family Code on the tiered pay system, compensation system, and other highlights include increases to juror compensation and changes for court reporters. Senate Bill 380, authored by Senator Zaffarini, will require interpreters to be paid by the county. If a party in a civil proceeding files a statement of inability to pay, it also requires increased reporting to OCA. That is also included actually in House Bill 3474 as well, the court omnibus bill. Senate Bill 775 and House Bill 4381 by Senator Zaffarini and Representative Leach related to an exemption of certain property from garnishment, attachment, execution of seizure by creditors. You may remember that it was a Judicial Council resolution in 2020. It did not pass that year. It was another bill that we attempted to move through the process, and unfortunately, it died on House calendars. Senate Bill 1045 created the 15th Court of Appeals. It's going to be a statewide court of appeals that has exclusive appellate jurisdiction over cases or matters arising out of or related to civil cases brought against a state agency, board, or an officer of the state. The court will initially have 3 justices and will be created on, will have a creation date of September 1, 2024. Moving to some judiciary budget highlights. House Bill 1 was the primary vehicle for the budget this year, and Senate Bill 30 was the supplemental. Several of OCA's exceptional items were included in the introduced version of House Bill 1, including staff salary increases, as well as the case level data project or funding mentioned previously, and some funding for Operation Lone Star. The staff raises were statewide to all state employees. They were 5% within fiscal year 2025, and another 5%, fiscal year 2024, and another 5% beginning in fiscal year 2025. That was the largest raise state employees had seen in over 40 years. Both the Court Security Division and the Specialty Courts will receive 2 additional staff to support their missions. And judicial technology, as you can see, was significantly funded with $6 million for case level data, $4.3 million for software licenses, and a network refresh. They did also provide funding to transfer Title IV-B associate judges, their IT support from the Attorney General's office to OCA, and OCA will receive 3 additional IT staff to support the business courts, associate judges, and 15th Court of Appeals. After the legislative session, OCA conducted a review of all the legislation that passed to identify projects or process changes that affect the agency or the judiciary. We identified 50 different projects. Some of the highlights include Senate Bill 48, authored by Senator Zaffarini, which standardizes the protective orders form and also requires a study on the effectiveness of protective orders. OCA also received funding to conduct a first of its kind study on the workload analysis for court personnel. This study should provide a statistically valid benchmark for courts to support or have the support that they need with the correct number of staff. House Bill 4293 from the 87th regular session by Representative Hinojosa was not funded last session, but was funded this session. It instructs OCA to have a court reminder text system that will be available to courts in Texas. OCA looks forward to working with the Judicial Council on all these legislative projects, and that concludes the legislative update, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Louis. Questions for Louis? Yes.
One of my bills, there's one of my bills that was vetoed, but the funding was not lined up to veto, so we have a funding for it, related legislation, so.
Yes, the guardianship.
That's how we're handling the guardianship support.
Yeah, we're still looking at that, because the way that House Bill 79 was drafted and using state funds, we have our legal team looking at it to make sure that because we do want to use that money, and we have several jurisdictions that have reached out to us that are interested in doing a pilot guardianship court. So if we can use that funding, we will.
I think they just overlooked the possibility of a line item veto of levy.
Well, it's so interesting because I think the governor's office knew that that was in there, because we had talked to them about that, the budget item, so, yeah, it's there. We have that funding, so we're hoping that we can use it.
We just refiled the bill, we just refiled it. We just special session. And then we can pass it, once we pass property tax relief, we'll reconsider those veto. If you have one, this one,
yes, it is.
I will say, some of these bills call for, Supreme Court to make rules. So for example, the, work product security, the first bill that we were talking about, the advisory committee is already working on a rule of judicial administration that would help, the trial judges and of course, everybody, figure out what's appropriate, what you should get your employees to sign, how you call attention to these issues. But then there are a lot of other bills that you mentioned that will have some rulemaking involved as well. So be on the lookout for that. And the only other thing I would add was that, in my view, the legislature was remained very supportive of our access to justice efforts, and all of our past funding is still in place. And we got about not quite $4 million for effort to provide legal services for children, especially who have had problems as a result of the pandemic. So I felt like that was all very, very good. Texas is one of the leaders in funding access to justice efforts. So it's very commendable that we have that support across the street. Other comments? Thank you very much. We'll go to the next item on the agenda, which is case level data discussion. Angela.
The little teeny tiny project we're working on. I'm Angela Garcia, the Chief Data Officer for OCA, and giving you an update on our case level data project. If you'll remember that a work group of OCA staff, subject matter experts, has been working on identifying and defining proposed data elements for collection. We are using the National Center for State Courts National Open Data Standards model that they developed in 2020. This consists of 7 case types with over 300 data elements in this model. That's a wish list of everything that every researcher could have dreamed of. Obviously, it's not possible, so we are going through it, and every state is going through it and picking out what is feasible, what means sense to them, what's critical for their operations, and what, knowing good practices going forward, what we should change to collect in the future so that we can develop good metrics and really monitor what the courts are doing and show transparency in court operations. So for each case type, we did an initial review, and that's coding everything as easy, medium, or hard. So the subject matter experts are basically me, a district clerk with 30 years of experience, and we've got a county clerk with decades of experience as well. So we've got theoretical, but I've worked 20 years implementing things in the past. So we've got theoretical versus real world, and we're coming somewhere in the middle. We don't want to throw out theory and have everybody panic like last time. So we're going through not only classifying which are easy or hard, but what are absolutely critical. Obviously, filings or dispositions are the core of any court activity. And then otherwise deciding what is important to collect in the future. We've had so much legislative activity over bail. SB 6 passed. There were things in there that the clerks cannot capture. So we kind of jiggered it into it. There are certain things that bail is always going to be asked for. So do we take the step to require that and make the courts and the case management system vendors change their processes and case management systems to capture it. Those are decisions that the council will need to make. Because anything that doesn't exist right now will require changes to the local case management systems and local processes. So our in-depth reviews have begun, and that is making recommendations for whether each element should be required, optional, or not collected at all. Flagging any proposed requirement that would be important to collect for policy reasons, like I just discussed, but will require changes to the case management systems and business processes. Ensuring that all the terms and values that are in this national model that really don't apply to Texas fit our environment and incorporate our reporting needs and legislative mandates, any other mandates that we have in Texas, and defining the acceptable values for each of these fields. Terminology is completely different across the nation, and we want to make sure that those values are consistent and that everybody's using the same definitions so that we get quality data. So in your materials is a very rough draft. Please emphasize very rough draft. I wanted to make it as simple as possible, but to show you the general idea of how the criminal section is shaping up. These are identified, mostly items identified as critical and feasible, for felony and misdemeanor cases. Right now, we're not dealing with Class C, only Class A and B and felony. Additional work is needed on these models, and nothing has been vetted outside of the subject matter work group, but again, just general idea. And this draft does not include any elements flagged as what we think might be important to make changes. But these are the basic, critical, and feasible case elements that we've identified so far. So in general, you'll have if you look at the first page, a case details set of data, which is basically your filing date, the case type, how it was disposed, disposition date, and if you've got well, in criminal cases, if you're on probation, it's not quite closed yet. So your disposition date may be different from your close date. So basic case information. And then we've got basic defendant details, which is demographic information about the defendants, whether or not they've ever been represented, which is a big important issue in criminal cases. Then we've got attorney information, what type of attorney has been appointed or not, what type of attorney is serving that defendant, or are they pro se. Then we've got the charge information, and this information is a total game changer from what we've done before. We get constant questions from the legislature about how many cases have been filed for this specific offense. And under our current system, we only do aggregate level, and the case is classified under the most serious charge. So somebody can get arrested with 40 charges. If it's capital murder, it's just going to be counted as capital murder. But under this new system, it will capture every single charge that the person is charged with. And this, I have made it correspond with the criminal history reporting system. So I want to be as consistent as possible with criminal history reporting system and our reporting. So the clerks, the burden is as little as possible, but it goes into very detailed information. So we'll have the charge level, we'll have enhancements like attempt or modifiers, attempt conspiracy that make it another level, whether a firearm is involved, and then ultimately what they were charged with. Was it a lesser offense? Where you see on the second page of the charge dispositions, were they dismissed? Was it unadjudicated with another offense? Questions we get all the time, and now we'll be able to answer them. Whether a guilty plea was entered, at what time, was there an actual trial held? And then the most difficult information to capture is what everybody's been asking for lately, is that pretrial information, the bond, did they violate their bond conditions? So we know for sure we've got the bond type and the bond amount. Other than that, we're going to have to make decisions about whether or not we capture that other information related to SB6. Diversion information is also very difficult to capture. That's usually handled by the probation departments. So the clerk does not have information. At the basic level, we may have a date into a diversion program, an entry and an exit. We may or may not know if they're successful or not, but ultimately we'll know the disposition. So that's another area, if we want to look at whether diversion is working, we'll have to make recommendations for additional process changes and case management system changes. And finally, we will capture certain important motions. As our district clerk said, if you want motions, when she saw the recommendations from the National Center, she gave us a electronic capital murder case, and that went on for pages and pages and pages. We cannot accept that level of information. So we're identifying which motions are important, which would be the AFID of inability to pay costs, or motions of filing, sorry. We're always asked about that. Hate crime findings are mandatory by law to be reported. Hearings de novo, motions to revoke, of course, we capture that anyway. Recusals, motions for new trial, and whether they were granted. And not included in this model are, we've also got all the sanctions. So again, aligned with CJIS, what was the sentence, fines, fees, etc. So not included in this model is everything related to a criminal case. So that would be writs of habeas corpus, non-disclosures, expunctions, bond forfeitures, seizure, there's a whole other thing that hasn't been addressed yet that we need to decide how we're going to capture. Right now, that's either not captured or it's captured under the civil section, which has caused problems. So a lot of additional work to do, but there's our basic model, and going forward, a lot of the structure of the case categories coming out will be in that same structure, depending on the case category. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Angela. Questions?
You are creating an active intelligent case management system along with what you're building right now.
No, it will be a data warehouse.
It's just a data.
Yes, so it will envision API coming and getting that information, hopefully programmed at a local level, and that if there's a change to that record, it gets sent to us. So we have up-to-date information on those cases.
And as instant notification up to the live data.
As live as we can, yeah.
Any badges through night, or
that would be a question for cases.
Yeah, my understanding is that the way the API would work is that we would get an instant notification that something had changed, and then later on in the evening, when the system isn't being hammered by the local court, we could go back and say, now tell me everything that changed on this case.
you have 24 hours, 48 hours?
Yeah, about 24 hours.
Which has an impact in the way you're scheduling the cases, so something to keep in mind for the judges to have fresh.
Oh, they will not be using, this is just for our use?
Just for data.
Just for data. And then we have a lot of course, when we go to the case level data, there's a lot of concerns about security, confidentiality. Those are a lot of other issues that we've got to work through. If we collect juvenile data, that's huge. Mental health data, which we're required to collect. There are a lot of data governance issues around this that need to be really thought about, and deciding what is available to the public, because some part of this will be available to the public.
Is it a way that you are organizing the data where you could, for example, identify the quality of the claims and citations, for example, so the load for the judges is minimized and their increased efficiency that way?
We are just going to be we're going to have.
Okay, so you're a data lake.
We're a data, exactly.
Being a data lake or having a data lake is very nice and very useful, but who mines the data lake? Who does it?
That's what we haven't discussed.
Because you have a lake,
right?
So you don't have the fishing pools,
right?
Yes. That's a piece that needs to happen.
Yes.
And I was just gonna add, my understanding is this is like a library for people to use to study what is happening in Texas law, but the courts have their own case management software where they can use data to efficiently set hearings and trials and stuff like that. So that also is happening, that's just not this project, right?
Yeah, I was a consultant in the Utah State Court system as well, and they are actually connecting them, because that's the whole purpose. If you have a data lake, the purpose is that you start feeding the case management systems at one point or another, so then it's functional.
Right, and so my understanding is, once we develop this, then all the case management providers like Tyler and the other people that courts are actually using in Texas will have to get on board with this.
Yes.
They will have to, yes. However, it's not being used at the local, we may be able to, we'll have to report out by court. So that information is going to be public. But they're not going to use it for scheduling, they're not going to use it, they retain their own data, and that is the data of record at the local level. We are just getting a copy, and we are not going to verify that it's accurate or up to date, or nothing like that.
What's the completion timeline?
We do not.
We don't know. It's long.
It's a
very
huge,
long.
huge project.
And I'll say, to add on to what Justice Miskel's point, the long pole in the tent is the case management vendors, is working with them. We know the case management market in the state of Texas, and at the district county level, there are 5 major vendors that cover, those 5 cover 98% of the market. And so we're already engaging with them to let them know these changes are coming about. We've done electronic filing, that's API based, and so we're just going to be adding on to it to do case level data. So the responses we've gotten from them, they're excited about it and are happy to work with us. And frankly, are looking forward to having data standards adopted, because then that allows them to go out to their customers and say, no, you should be collecting this. The Judicial Council said you should be doing it, so please do that.
And there's no other states that have fully completed this. Illinois, Florida, and Nevada are starting as well. But most of those states are also implementing e-filing at the exact same time, which is, I can't imagine doing that, but that's what they're doing. And so I think Texas is a lot further along than other states on this, but yes, it's a huge project. We do have some legislative mandates now, but the Judicial Council will have to do adopt rules for all of this. So what I'd like the council to consider today is, we are starting with criminal, is to authorize OCA to create a stakeholder group with members of the council, with clerks and judges and members of the various courts to look at these elements to make sure that we're not missing anything, and then bring a proposal to the council at the fall meeting so we can start working on rules.
Representative Smith.
Practicing law for 29 years, I see all kinds of issues in general jurisdiction courts about dealing with folks with disabilities. Is there going to be anything in this program that's going to track how we're handling accommodations for folks and that sort of thing?
There is a recommended data element in the National Center model that shows whether there is a disability in the case. So somebody has a need for accommodations. So if that's important to the council, we can certainly add that to the recommendations.
Yes, please.
About the timing on all this, to go on with what I said a moment ago about the judicial pay raise, I think this program is going to be pivotal towards getting folks comfortable where they need to be to get a substantial pay raise. And so 2023, I don't know what the time frame is, but I've heard like January of 2025, which obviously would be the first month of the next session. We'll just say that's a little better, so that we can get some data going and then be able to go back and put on the press for what we need to have as a healthy condition.
Justice Miskel.
You've moved on.
Anybody else? The judiciary has a history in these areas, and so we're sort of beginning to explore late 20th century data collection and use, and we're not even a fourth of the way through the 21st century, so that's good. We'll count that as caught up for us. But Megan suggests that we authorize OCA to form a working group of various stakeholders to make sure that we're covering all these bases. Any discussion about that? You want to, we don't need a motion, do we?
Yes, I would do a motion.
I'll move.
Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Passes. And if you want to be part of that, just tell Angela, Megan, and make sure you.
Especially right now coming into criminal. That's the first step, and right now it's the most important. That's been in the news, that's been in the, so it's so important that we get this right because it's going to be performance for judges and we've got to do a great job. Thank you.
Next on the agenda is AI. So I think we started talking about GPT in December. I think that's the first idea. And now here we are. And as I said, the Fifth Circuit had about 700 lawyers and judges at a conference in early May. A presentation on it, which was fairly alarming, but most of us who saw it thought, well, at least we don't have to worry about it too urgently. We'll get to it one of these days. And then the American Law Institute had a program 2 weeks later, and the president of Microsoft was on the panel, Brad Smith, and he said, it's here. And it's, if we don't start worrying about handling it, use the word regulation. So, but figuring out guardrails, misuse, and so on, we're going to be behind the curve. And then a trial lawyer who I've known for a long time, many years, called me yesterday and said he just realized that it was not going to be easy to offer photographs and evidence anymore because when I was on the trial bench, you just handed the witness a photograph and the witness said, yeah, it looks like that. He didn't have to take it. He didn't have to be there. He didn't have to vouch for it. It is what it is. And if you don't think it looks right or the shading is changed or they move something, yeah, it goes to the weight and not to the admissibility. But now, with all the easy fakes, he said the bars were starting to worry about how will we know when we see the picture whether it's been tampered with or not because it's essentially indiscernible unless you get experts. So it's upon us. But Casey's going to give us an overview of it. Casey?
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm Casey Petty. I'm the Director of IT here at the Office of Court Administration. Thank you for having me. This is a particularly IT nerdy topic, so this is things that I enjoy looking at. As a technologist, I'll apologize on behalf of all technology that in the courtroom, we tend to use technology and alarming a lot together in the same sentences. We certainly don't mean that, but it's indicative of that the technology moves fast. So today we're going to talk about some of the latest stuff that we're seeing with generative AI, and this is stuff that, let's see if I can get this to work, turn it on. There we go. And so what we're going to talk about a little bit is what generative AI is and how it works, some of the benefits that there are of it, because there are benefits to it. Some of the challenges, limitations, legal, ethical concerns, there's a lot for that. Some potential misuses and uses in the justice system, because there are both sides of the coin to that. We'll talk a little bit about where AI is heading next into the future, and then we'll talk about some of the things that the courts should be starting to consider or what they need to do right now to kind of stay ahead of the game. So you may have seen generative AI things in the news. ChatGPT is actually two different AI technologies together, natural language processing, which is talk to a computer like you would a person, and generative AI rolled in on the back end of it. But then we've got instances now, news where judges are now asking their lawyers, was any part of this brief or any part of this document generated artificially? And just wanting to know that up front, and sometime requiring that it be disclosed up front that they've done that. You may have seen two judges, one was a U.S. attorney that got fined for having ChatGPT write his brief for him. That particular instance it hallucinated and started making up cases, which is great if you're an attorney and you want to prove your point. Well, if you make up case law to prove your point and it's a fake case, sure, that works, but that's kind of like what you would do in high school in English, not what you would do at court. But the brief goes in, opposing counsel is like, what is this? And they take it to the judge and they're like, none of these cases exist. The sites look good, but they're all fake. I think those attorneys, there are 2 attorneys that have been caught doing that. I think they each got a fine of like $5,000 for it, for doing that. And then it is prone to hallucinations and bias, and we'll talk about that as well. And so you're going to continue seeing lots of stuff in the news. So some warnings and caveats about this. It is new. As the chief said, we heard about it in December. It's progressing very, very quickly. Anything I tell you today may be obsolete next week or a month from now, or it may still be good. And then be aware that we are starting to see technology vendors say, oh, it's got AI in it. Well, you need to be cautious about that. You may remember a long time ago in the courtroom, everything was in the cloud, and they were saying, oh, it's the cloud and the cloud. AI is now the new buzzword for that. You'll catch throughout my presentation little things. That top image is from DALL-E, which is an image generation. That was an oil painting of a human using technology. So that's generative AI coming up with that picture. And the bottom one is generative AI changing quickly. When you ask it what that looks like, that's the picture it gives you. Very interesting. So, as I mentioned, generative AI is part of the umbrella of general AI intelligence. We have machine learning. That's the machine seeing processes go. And, oh, I know every time there's a motion for an extension that we granted for 10 days. And so it just knows that that's what's going on and what's going to happen. Robotic process automation is another facet of machine learning, to where you integrate that into the system so that your systems know, oh, every time we get a motion for extension on a reporter's record, we grant for 10 days. Well, I don't need a human to do that. Then stamp it, move it, and the machine does it. We talked about natural language processing. That is being able to converse with the computer as you would a person rather than the computer issuing specific commands. And then generative, which is what we're talking about. Generally speaking, with process management, there are 3 methods, and it also all has to do with where the human is in the loop. So you can have the human out of the loop where the computer controls everything and there's no human at all involved. That can get scary. We've all seen movies about that when we were kids, where the computer tells you, I can't let you do that. There's humans in the loop, which is basically the human does a part and then lets the computer do another part and then goes back to the human, to where it's just like extra things. And then there's humans on the loop where the computer's doing the work, but there's a human there to check and provide that check and balance to make sure the process is running the way it should be going. So generative AI specifically is very interesting. So the first step is that you take a bunch of data from wherever. It could be the web, it could be pictures, it could be all the opinions of all the judges and orders that they've written in the state of Texas, and let me just take all that and ingest that. Then the secret sauce is data algorithms then go in and categorize all that and figure out, oh, this is an opinion written by Chief Justice Heggs, and it's about this case, and let me categorize it, and let me do that. And then once you have that data set as a human, you can go and prompt it. Hey, I'm thinking about writing a brief for this case at the Supreme Court. Can you take this text and tell me what Chief Heggs would probably do about it? And then it will take it, use that data source, and say, well, I can't tell you for sure, but based on this and this, I don't think you should use these words, because whenever these words show up, the chief will rule against, dissent against that. So, you think the biggest thing in generative AI is the word generative, and so at the high level, it's just taking a bunch of data and generating more data based on that other data. And so you get that in with text, give me a summary of this, or write me a letter of thanks, or those kinds of things where it takes those data sources and is generating more data for you. It can be pictures. I want oil paintings, I want photos. They've got it in music. Volley is a new thing for voice. Microsoft can take 3 seconds of your voice. Doesn't matter which 3 seconds, just 3 seconds, and now it can replicate your voice for anything that you say. As a mere IT director, that's fine, but if I'm a judge, I'd worry about that.
It can write in iambic pentameter.
Say it again?
It can write in iambic pentameter.
It can. You could say, like, I want Chief Heck to sing a country song, and do it for me. This is what it would sound like. So what we've seen, and this has exploded over the last few months, is all these companies coming out with different implementations of generative AI. You all, as legal people, are generally familiar with text generation, like ChatGPT. Google has Bard. Bing has now implemented OpenAI with ChatGPT. There's also Cohere. In the IT world, we're dealing with programmers having the same ability to say, I need you to generate code for this application for me. There's cybersecurity implications, code review testing implications there. Image and video generation things, I was playing with these. Specifically, Synthesia is a very good tool that you just type in text. So if you're doing a training video, I can say, I want this person that looks like this, and I want them to say that. And it looks like a human, and they're saying it, and it's in that. I call it in the uncanny valley of where as a human, you're like, that's really creepy, because it's so good and so close, but it's not there yet. And then finally, we've got the other generative AIs. Volley, like I said, can take your voice and make you say anything you want to. Tone, Gamma, Murph, Loudly, those are all musician type things. You can upload like a melody, like I want it to, you know, the different melodies that you have in your mind, and say, I want you to make a song in country style or rock style or soft jazz. And it'll take that melody and generate songs for you on that. So lots of fun, neat, shiny things to do. And there's benefits to it. It's speed. So obviously, if I need to write a brief on a case, the computer can go and do all the case law research for me and generate something a lot faster than a human could doing the actual research and using the brain power to come up with that. Idea and content creation is another benefit. Recently at Google, they found a new search algorithm that nobody in the past 50 years had ever thought of. And they asked one of the code generative AIs to go look for ways to make this faster. And it came up with an algorithm that nobody had ever thought of before. Resource generation, they use it in data modeling with meteorology, where it takes lots of data to figure out what's going to happen into the future, and I may not have that data, so I can use generative AI to come up with that data to then model what things could happen. And then obviously the interface of it, it gives you the ability to interact in different ways. You can talk to it, you can type to it, all the different things. It can do multiple languages, so if English isn't your first language, you just talk in Spanish and off you go. Okay, this is a fun slide. So the first challenge with all of this that we're starting to see is costs. As you all know, the technology people aren't run by the Boy Scouts, so there is money involved, and usually it's big money. Right now, OpenAI, I think, is spending multiple hundreds of millions of dollars a day in hosting costs just to keep the thing running. They do charge a $20 a month extra add-on if you want priority access, but even with the number of users they have on that, they are still very deep in the red with that. So the other costs to think about with that, not only monetary, but climate costs. Computers generate heat, and that impacts the environment. And then also, if you think about if we use generative AI to do things like replace writers, or you were to replace lawyers, or even judge, or whatever you decide to replace it with, that's a person that has a job that's contributing to society. Now they have to retool and figure out, okay, I can't do that anymore. What am I going to do? Another one that's big with the courts is data. Is that especially with courts, there's not enough data to train a model on. You know, I joke about, tell me what the chief is going to do. The number of opinions that the chief would have written over his career still isn't a big enough model for the computer to make a good guesstimate of what the chief is going to do. The other thing that happens with this data is that if you already have bias built into the data, just by the fact that, you know, everybody's got some implicit bias, now that bias is built into the same data set, so your generative AI is going to have the same bias that your judges do. So that's something to worry about it. And then talking with some of our other state counterparts, everybody agrees that the data that you feed into these things needs to be public data. For instance, we know that DPS is forbidding the use of ChatGPT, and that's because they don't want an officer on the side of the road saying, I need you to write my report on, and here's the name of the victim, and here's the name of this, like, no. This is all confidential data. You do not need to be putting into those systems. The reliability of it, we've seen, it still needs to be supervised by humans all the time. It comes up with some goofy results at times. I'll show you some in a second. And then hallucinations may occur. If it doesn't, and we call that a hallucination, but that's in case law. If I need to make a point and there's no case for it, it's just going to make one up. And it's hallucinating data that doesn't exist, and it's just plunking it in there. And then, of course, the biggest thing is ownership of this. If I go and say, I need an email generated for me that does X, Y, Z, and I take that email and I tweak it to make it sound like it's coming from me, do I own that email? Or is that the machine's email that I'm licensing? What implications is it if you're a recording artist and now I have your voice? Is that who owns that song? Is that your song because it's your voice? Or is it mine, or is it the machine? So there's a lot of that that is yet to be worked out. So this is some interesting, and I was brainstorming with a gentleman at the National Center for State Courts and their consulting division, and then also with the Integrated Justice Information Systems chair, who is the organization that deals with vendors of justice systems, to talk about what are some of the uses. And so this is what we came out with. Predicting case outcomes, obviously, if you have a big enough data set in civil cases, you can kind of tell where the cases are going to go if you look at previous data and forecasts. You could have potentially better assistance to self-represented litigants, more customized, guiding them through. You could have tailored proposed orders and motions and brief based on the judge. I put this under uses, but maybe this is a misuse. If I am an attorney and I am before Judge Spillane and I'm going to file a motion, I can say, hey, here's the motion I'm going to file. Can you review it and pretend that you're Judge Spillane and tell me what he would think if you have the right data set? And it would give you an opinion, may or may not be right. Automating legal research, obviously you can feed it, would be able to feed it a brief and then say, can you go find cases for me in case law that support these kinds of points. That next one, predictive policing, I was like, that's a little sketchy for me. A potential misuse of, hey, we see things, this is where should we deploy the police in different areas? Providing better legal training to the community. This, I think, is actually a different good thing with some of those video services. Whenever we have a change, and at least in IT, we'd have to go and refilm that video, and that's a pain. But this way, if I just go change the script and hit generate, then now I get a new video with that stuff. And then obviously you can use it for judicial recommendations of, okay, with this case, this is typically what happens or what you should do. And I'm not saying that we do any of this, I'm just saying this stuff you could hear about. Misuses, the chief talked about fake exhibits. This is going to be a bigger and bigger problem because I can get it to generate a video or a picture or a sound of anything I asked it to do. So the days of saying, here's the picture right here, or even if it's someone in trial court saying, here, look on my phone, I took a picture, those have to be, have added scrutiny. We've also seen what I call lazy lawyering, where a lawyer just says, write my brief. Control A to copy all, Control V to paste, submit, don't even look at it. I can do that. I don't need an attorney for that, but I would prefer an attorney who knows what they're doing and it's like, no, this is the law. Again, lazy legal researching. If you just let the computer go off and do it, you're going to have to check the results because it may not come back with the right thing. Fake judicial work products. If I got a divorce and I didn't like the way that happened, I could use generative AI to help me come up with a much more feasible, a much more plausible sounding decree from that same judge that maybe go better in my favor, and I can make it look exactly like what it was. And then finally, poorly designed or unmanaged tools to where there's just people using random stuff to do random things out there that is generative AI. So, have I crossed over into the alarming part yet? Okay, so this is an interesting one. This one was new as of about a week ago. This is Stable Diffusion 1.5 with a new nested diffusion engine in it. I told it, give me a picture of a judge banging a gavel. And this is what it generated. I see a gavel. I don't know if that's a judge, because
Most like a priest.
I was gonna say, it's in a robe, but like you'd be in a church choir, not in a, and like, I don't know what the stick is, but okay. So it's, you see why we say don't let it go unsupervised, because us technology people, that's what comes out if you let us go unsupervised. So some of the things that are going to be happening next for generative AI is this notion of quantum computing. So in the computer world, they're running up against the speed of computers because it's all electrically based, and the speed of electricity flowing through a wire, there's a physical limit. It cannot go any faster than this. So over the past 40 years, they just keep chunking on more and more transistors onto the smaller and smaller chip and fitting more, and all they're just doing is pushing more and more and more. With quantum computing, they flip that on its end, and they can compute much faster. And I can't explain how it works because my brain is not fully yet wrapped its head around it, but it's this notion of qubits, and they've got like a 16-qubit machine, and it can do all these computational things. But as they start partnering up generative AI with that, then it's going to get much faster and much better. There is a movement with AI to start making it think like a human, which is kind of creepy. They haven't gotten to that yet, but they are actively developing that. They will, in that effort to make computers go faster, they will use generative AI to find new algorithms and better software to make the existing stuff run faster, which will be cool. And you will start seeing more and more of it in the artistic spaces. Movies with computer graphics. Now it's going to be the AI generating the pictures. There's talk about, you know, we could replace writers on the writing strike with that. I don't think that's the case, but they're going that way. So immediate policy concerns. All of our data governance rules should still apply. So if it's confidential data, we do not want a generative AI to know that it's there or that it's out there. And that not only applies if we were to ever do a training data set for one of these, but also if you're interacting with it or if your staff's interacting with it, we want the staff to know this is the data that's confidential or sensitive. You should not be giving it publicly, even to another computer. And then secondly, all generative AI output, if you do elect to use it, should be reviewed by humans before putting it out for public consumption. As judges and as courts, everybody's going to start having to think about what, when, and where is it acceptable to use AI or generative AI, and what are the use cases. For examples, I'm willing to bet if I go to Megan and say, hey, I want to get this so that we can do training videos on how to check your email over the web, that's probably cool because we just type in the text, it's publicly available knowledge, versus if I said, I want to do it to go do this other thing, to go really, you're using sensitive data for that. And then the criteria that apply to it, the decision of what, when, and where, is it for a particular purpose, what's the impact, who's liable if it's wrong, that kind of thing. And then finally, this is one of my favorites. This is from Dolly. I asked it an oil painting in a courtroom setting of a guilty defendant receiving his sentence from the judge. And so I've seen pictures of defendants with their hands in their face in their hands. I don't think I've ever seen a judge where you're standing 2 feet away from them like this. But this is what it thinks that looks like in an oil painting format. But again, what can courts do right this instant? First, just being aware that it exists and that things are moving so fast and things are coming, that's your first step. Make sure that we all have data governance in place to know that this is sensitive data and that those rules still apply. Like you can't be giving it any kind of draft opinions because now you're going to be violating other rules because you've let it out publicly. Determine appropriate and inappropriate uses for the court. Included in that, whether or not, if you decide to have an appropriate use for the court, whether or not you should disclose that you're using generative AI or any AI in your processes. And then finally, if you do decide to ever go down that road, just share with everybody, share with your peers of what's going on. Because again, nationally, this is a very new, very fast topic and things are changing every day. So with that, this is my last photo for questions. This comes from Starry AI, Austin, Texas, in the year 2100, where technology has taken over the world. And so apparently, we're still here, but we have like there's another taller building in downtown Austin.
Three of the same building.
Well, buildings are cloning.
Maybe
the architects were replaced by generative AI, and now all the buildings look the same.
Casey, what happened to the robot? The presentation that you had said we had the robot.
Had the robot in it? I took it out because it was a video and I didn't want to mess with the
video.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the video one, and I can give you guys a copy of it, but it's just, it's a woman talking, and it really looks like a real person, and it's like, man, that's crazy that we're able to do this.
Yeah, on that point, the ALI, when the ALI presented their panel, when it got time to start, a video popped up. There's 500 of us sitting there watching, and it was the chair of the panel welcoming everybody to the panel and telling them what we're going to talk about. And he was a lawyer, and he was joking and a little bit and kind of being very cordial to the group. It lasted about 2.5, 3 minutes. And at the end of it, he said, oh, by the way, I'm not that guy. He's never even seen this. I'm just what the staff said. The staff said, generate a welcoming video with this guy doing it, and that's what he came up with. And the guy was sitting right there. He said, it sounded like my voice. It looked like my mannerisms. It looked like me. So as you say, it's pretty startling, yeah.
And that's also the inverse of the faked evidence, is people who actually do bad things and were real photos or real videos can just say, oh, that's AI, that's made up. Right. I never.
Chief, they're having a lot of issues in high schools with this whole AI thing too. Yep. A lot of the teachers are trying to figure out what's next and what to do about it.
Yeah.
And
And everybody says the election season is going to be crazy. Yeah.
Well, the good news is there are content detectors and anti-ChatGPT tools already. Actually, I was on the panel of judges in Princeton put out their AI content detector. So that's something that maybe is something that will benefit you. Also, there are classifiers, so Harvard is working on the classifying side. So there's ChatGPTs and AI generative AI content detectors now being created. So look for help from colleges and universities because they're working on this. So that's the good news. The other part is on the legislative side, the New York Department of Education has already worked with the state legislation to ban ChatGPT from education. So just some food for thought.
And Chief, to build on that point real quick, we are working with DIR and the executive branch collaboratively on generative AI and AI because we're seeing this not as just a judiciary issue, but a statewide issue as well.
Yeah. Yes.
I guess I wonder, it just begs the question of when we look at our evidence rules and, what's happening in our courts. The brief was a great and interesting story, and it was caught pretty easily, but when we start talking about these videos and, when I'm sitting there thinking it's authenticated, what is that gonna mean?
Yeah.
We're using video all the time.
We are, and our officers and our citizens.
Realistic, long free trial.
Long free trials, yeah.
Well, this is moving so quickly, and discussions are in so many quarters. So Cindy Tisdale told me last week, the new president of the state bar, that she's going to form a working group to look at issues, particularly from the organized bars point of view. And the advisory committee at their last meeting a couple of weeks ago is going to start looking at what does this pertain to the evidence rules, procedural rules. But these are kind of siloed things, I mean, they're going to be thinking about it, but they might not think about the broader picture. And we do need to make sure that the branches are working together in case we need regulation from the legislature, or we want to just communicate with them where we think our problems are going to be, and also with the executive and make sure that we're working together on stuff. And then with the technology groups who really know the ins and outs, and we're just kind of standing back looking at it to some extent. So I think the council needs to, our computer committee needs, data committee needs to begin to have some sort of structure, and maybe we circle back with DIR, maybe, just make sure that we're cooperating with whatever else is going on, and then thinking about the problems that as they come up. Because frankly, several of us have talked about Judge Starr's order in the Northern District, making lawyers certify that they looked over whatever they filed, even if it was generated by AI, that it's not what it's supposed to be. The kind of down in the weeds issues that my trial lawyer friend was talking about, like just, what about a photograph in an ordinary trial? And the lawyer who's offering it may not even know that he may not know himself it was a fake, because he got it from somewhere else, or somebody, with his client manufactured it, or whoever knows. So it's just going to be something that I think we need to stay on top of. So we'll ask our computer data committee, and again, if anybody wants to be part of these committees or groups, welcome to sign on. Yes.
And I was just gonna suggest that the members of this council play with it, right? So I set up a free account on, it's like chat.openai.com, which is ChatGPT. And it's been real interesting to play with. There's all kinds of, I used it to sell a lawnmower on Facebook. I used it, all kinds of, and it wrote a great first draft of a speech I had to give, but you could see the problems in it, like it made up an Abraham Lincoln quote. So I double checked everything. But that's what it does. It tells you what the right answer would sound like. It doesn't tell you what the right answer is. But another thing I was going to suggest for the courts of excellence, there's a Louisiana judge who's been using AI videos to quickly generate things to help self-represented litigants. And so if you think about if I was going to go make a video, it'd take me a while, and then I'd have to find someone to film it, and then I'd have to get dressed up. But with AI, you can just say, okay, let's make a real quick video on how to request a record from a court reporter or whatever it is, and you can just do it real quick. So that might be an opportunity to use its powers for good. I've been tasked with starting that effort for our Court of Appeals on doing some videos for self-represented litigants, and I'm planning to check out if AI can help me do that more quickly. So I do think everyone's tendency is to, oh, the computers are coming for us, so panic. But I would also before we start to panic, play with the tools so that when we start to talk about it, we actually know what we're talking about.
Actually, just that judge he has for his Zoom court, it's one of those bots, I guess, that welcomes them to the Zoom court and tells them stay in the waiting room and all that. And it's supposed to be him, but it's
and Miami courts did the same thing. Miami courts have a chat bot on their website in English and Spanish that instead of it, I've used those message things on websites and they're terrible and they never give you the answer that you need. But the Miami court one, they demonstrated for us and it's really a lot better. So anyway, they're good and bad, much like everything.
That explains, I got an email from Emily Miskell that was kind of impertinent.
Something about Abraham Lincoln.
That's right. It wasn't me.
Yes. Here's a question for the lawyers. I am a technology person, so I know nothing about law. How does this impact intellectual property?
Well, there are.
I guess we'll find out about 10 years, right?
You can ask it to, you were joking about me making a country music song, but you can ask it to do that. You can take 3 seconds of my voice and turn me into a country singer that you don't sell, but at least so and the U.S. Supreme Court had a case this year on not really about that, but on intellectual property and how much are you copying it and how much are you inventing it yourself. So those will be issues. Or patents or
systems for that.
Yeah. That falls under the class because you can't make
That concludes our agenda. Any other business before we adjourn? We don't have a time fixed for the fall meeting, but it'll be in the September, October timeframe. We'll get you a time here shortly. And again, try to get our committees together, get our assignments. You remember the process, then we work on that for basically a year, come up with recommendations. Go ahead and try to get them done in the fall of next year so that we can get the bill directors to work on them. So we'll be ready to go when the session starts. So that's kind of yes.
And if we can think in terms of submitting and taking action regarding legislative recommendations timely so we can develop bills and pre-file.
Yeah.
That will be what, November?
Yeah. We can try to All right, thank you very much. We stand adjourned.